Focus here, record here, clap for sync. All right, sorry about that, guys. My camera's in the shop and I'm using a DSLR for the first time, and I forgot just how many bits and pieces you need to make that work. So if anything goes wrong, let's blame it on the gear like a real professional. When I started out in photography, it took me more than 2 years before I earned anything. I didn't earn a cent for almost 2 years. I was mostly interested in photojournalism and documentary stuff. I really wanted to work for big newspapers. And it didn't seem to matter what I did. I tried everything. I posted to Facebook, I had a blog, I even had a Google Plus account, all the things you were supposed to do in that day. I did, and nothing seemed to work. It was driving me insane. I felt like I was bashing my head against a brick wall. I was shooting every day, or 5-6 days a week at least. I was treating it like it was my full-time job. I put everything I had into it, and nothing was coming back. In the beginning it made sense. I wasn't great at photography. I needed more time to practice and to grow and to get better. But by the end of the first year, and then closer to the end of the second year, I was pretty decent. I think I was honest with myself, and I looked at people around me who were getting paid, and I thought that I was as good as they were, or at least close enough that I should be getting some jobs. But no matter what I did, nothing came. I was living in Cambodia at the time, which is a really cheap place to live, but even so I was running out of money, and I was starting to think that I might have to go back to my old job as an English teacher. Now there's nothing wrong with English teaching, but it wasn't the right job for me, and the thought of that just filled me with dread. I quit that job 2 years earlier, taken all my savings and traveled and built a portfolio. I had, committed 100% to photography, and the thought that I might have failed and I was gonna have to go back and sign another 1-year contract was really awful. But I was desperate for money, and so in those kind of situations, what can you do? It was a really crazy time in Cambodia where the opposition party had just been allowed back into the country, and it seemed like there might be a political revolution, or at least a changing of political parties for the first time in 30 years. So it was a pretty big deal. I was out in the streets almost every day, taking pictures and following those events as they unfolded. A lot of people were calling it the Cambodian Spring, after the Arab Spring uprisings that happened that same year. Everyone who was out there, all the journalists and photographers, we all had this sense like we were part of something really important. So I was photographing a lot of political unrest, clashes between police and protesters, and some of them were getting pretty violent. Now, you definitely don't need to take pictures of violent things to be a good documentary photographer. In fact, now looking back, I realize I was super misguided in that thinking. But I wanted to work for big newspapers, and I'm sure you've all heard the saying, if it bleeds, it leads, and I really believe that. And so I started going to any events or protests or demonstrations where I thought there was a chance of violence. And I started to get some pretty intense pictures. But no matter what I did, the news agencies weren't interested. I sent photos to all the big newspapers and all the big press agencies, but no one responded. Sometimes they would get back to me and say, hey, thanks for reaching out, but we're not interested. It was extremely disheartening. Everyone around me told me, just keep doing what you're doing and eventually you'll catch a lucky break. But no one could tell me when that was, and it drove me crazy. Then one night there was a huge fight between protesters and police. I won't get too deep into it, but basically a group of protesters started throwing Molotov cocktail bombs. The police rushed in, and there was a siege situation where a whole bunch of protesters were holed up in a building, and the police were trying to get inside. They were throwing chairs and desks and cinder blocks down on top of them, and it was really the first time that the opposition or the political demonstrators had fought back. It was super late at night, and a lot of people had gone home, and I didn't want to be there either, but I was so desperate that I just stuck with it and kept shooting. I got some pretty decent pictures, and I went home and stayed up all night editing, and by the time I was done, it was about 6 o'clock in the morning. A friend gave me a contact for the AFP news editor in Cambodia, and I sent him off 40 pictures thinking, all right, at least this time I'm gonna make some money. There's no way they can turn these down. I was pretty confident that I had good pictures, and there were almost no other photographers there. But when I heard back from the editor, he only wanted to buy one photo, and their budget was $25. I was so mad. It was one of the angriest I'd ever been in my life, and I actually told myself, that's it, I'm quitting this industry, this isn't worth it, I'm going home, I'm gonna try something else, anything but this. I was furious. I basically had stayed up all night risking my life, and in the end got $25. It was really insulting, and I was humiliated and embarrassed, and I really never wanted to be involved in the photojournalism industry again. And then something amazing happened. The story sort of escalated into a big international news event, and I was one of the few photographers who had photos available of that night. So while I'd been sleeping, the picture had been going kind of viral and making the rounds of all the big newspapers, and when I woke up, it actually had been published in the New York Times. The Times had always been a dream client. They were always sort of the very top. They were who I dreamed of working for when I started as a photojournalist. So to have a picture in there was a huge deal to me. Basically, I went from never having a single publication credit to my name to being published in the biggest newspaper in the world overnight. It was pretty amazing. That picture was the basis for the rest of my career. After that, I started getting calls from the Times editors in Bangkok and Hong Kong and sometimes in Paris, and I got regular assignments for them. Then, with the brand name recognition of having worked for the Times, I was able to be taken more seriously by other people in town and aid organizations and all that stuff, and before long I was supporting myself full-time from photography. Honestly, if I'd known how much impact that photo was going to have, I would have paid them $25 to publish it. After that, everything went great for a few years. But then slowly my priorities started to change, and I decided I wanted to try documentary video production instead of photography, so I moved to Mexico. That meant starting at the bottom of the pile again. I really didn't have a video reel, I had no experience in documentary, and it was a totally different market. I needed another lucky break, but again, no one could tell me when it would come. No one in Mexico cared about what I'd done in Cambodia, and the editors were all different. So it was really like starting again. I went back to having no work at all. It took me another year before I started to get paid, and during that time, my savings were drying up and I was starting to freak out. I thought I might need another day job. Again, I was doing all the right things. I was shooting personal projects, I told all my Mexican friends that I was available for video jobs, I was taking online courses, I was studying, I was reading books, I was doing everything I could think of to get this new career off the ground, but still nothing would stick. Honestly, it was a really rough year. I didn't have a ton of friends, my Spanish was rough, I was going broke very quickly, and I was borderline depressed. Then, I got another lucky break. National Geographic came down to shoot a documentary about heroin production in Mexico, and on the first day of their shoot, their B camera operator fell off a truck and broke his leg. My friend was the fixer on that job, and he knew I was trying to get into video production, so he gave the director my name. She called me up. First thing she said was, "Can you use a C300?" Which of course I lied and said yes, even though I'd never seen one before. And after talking, she agreed to give me a shot. Now, if we're talking about lucky breaks, that is actually a lucky break. That is me getting my entire career start off of somebody's leg breaking. You could never predict that. No one could tell me when it would happen, and if that happened in a movie, you probably wouldn't believe it. Later, I found out that it was actually that guy's first international job with Nat Geo, and it was, really disappointing and sad for him, and I felt pretty bad. But for me, it was a huge opportunity. The job went really well. I got along with everyone on the crew, and we ended up shooting some crazy stuff about heroin production in Mexico. The DP and I got along so well that he started bringing me on to other jobs after that. Over the course of the next year, he brought me onto a bunch of things to shoot B-cam and AC for him, and I ended up flying all over the world, learning from him, and getting a bunch of really great contacts. Nowadays, we don't work together as much because, we're trying to get the same position on the crew, but if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have the same career that I do now. He taught me most of what I know about doc production, and the only reason that I met him is because that dude's leg broke. That is the luckiest break possible, and no one could have ever told me when it was going to happen. So many people who have successful filmmaking careers have stories like this. They worked really hard for a long time, and eventually they got a lucky break. The problem for you when you're starting out is that you have no idea when those breaks are going to come. That makes it so frustrating. It could be days or weeks or years or even decades. The writer Steven Pressfield, who wrote a great book called The War of Art that everyone should read, didn't get his break until he was in his 50s, I think. So if you're just starting out, the idea that you need to wait for a lucky break is super annoying. I get it. I know, I've been there. But unfortunately, it's just the reality of these kind of creative careers. You need a lucky break, and no one can tell you when it will happen. So what can you do to maximize your chances of getting a lucky break? Well, for starters, you can be ready. When a lucky break comes, you need to be able to jump on it. When National Geographic called me and I got my first shot, I worked harder than I'd ever worked before. That chance was everything for me, and I made sure to make the most of it. If you want to be a DP, That means shooting as much as possible, every day if you can, so that when someone finally gives you your first gig, you crush it. It could also mean taking trips to New York or LA on your own expense to make contacts and meet people that you want to work with in the future. Or it could be doing online workshops or going to film festivals or online networking events. I'm not sure, there's a ton of things you can do, and that's really what it comes down to. Being in a position so that when a lucky break comes your way, you can jump on it. You want to be like a rabid street dog that found a piece of food. You want to grab a hold of it and not let go no matter what. Lucky breaks can be few and far between. In the entirety of my 10-year career, I've gotten exactly 2 of them. So it's really important that when one comes your way, you make the most of it. It could be years before you get another shot. So set yourself up for success and practice like crazy so that you're ready when something comes your way. If you put yourself out there for long enough, good things will happen and people will notice. Now, your lucky break probably isn't going to be the same as mine. In fact, it probably won't be the same as any ones you've heard before. It's going to be uniquely yours. You can't predict when it's going to happen, which is really frustrating, I know, believe me, but it will happen if you keep doing the right things for long enough. Success is effort over time. If you do that, if you try hard enough for long enough, eventually your lucky break will come. And when it does come, be like that rabid street dog. Grab a hold of it and hold on for dear life.